Hello, students. This is Mr. V coming to you today to talk to you a little bit about what happened, what is going to happen in the future, and kind of what to expect from the 2020 election cycle. Now, as most of you know by this point, if not all of you, the news organizations, news outlets have declared Joe Biden the victor of the 2020 election for the presidency. Now, the reason they did that is because they called Pennsylvania, a key state, they called Pennsylvania, and at this point Nevada too, uh, as Joe Biden's states. They basically said that he won those states, which pushed him over the key number that you need to win the Electoral College, which is 270. Now, if you look at the actual Electoral College map, and I went to 270towin.com in order to utilize their map, which we've used in class before. This is how the Electoral College map stands right now. Now, the reason that this is such an important distinction and why I have to make this very clear in order to avoid any sort of political shenanigans or whatever else, what I'm telling you is where we're at right now, and anything is subject to change. So here's what we know right now. First of all, Joe Biden is projected to win the presidential election. That's a key distinction here. It doesn't mean that he has officially won anything. So what we're talking about here is news networks such as CNN, ABC News, the AP, which is the Associated Press, even Fox News, have all said, hey, we feel that Joe Biden has won the presidency. Now, they're basing that off of percentages of votes. Okay, they're basing it off of how many ballots have been counted. And basically what they did is and this is how they call states on election night, they count up the ballots and they get the results from the Board of Elections in each individual state. Because if you remember, each state runs their own elections. So in Ohio, you register to vote with Ohio's Board of Elections. So the Board of Elections in Ohio runs their own election for the presidency. There's no such thing in reality as a national election because everything is state by state. The Electoral College is the way we do this, at least for the presidency. So what happened here is they counted up the individual ballots, the popular vote of each individual state. And it doesn't matter if you win a state by 5 million or one vote. It doesn't matter. In 48 of the 50 states, they basically are reported out in 48 of the 50 states, they're reported out as winner take all. Okay, so that means that when Donald Trump won Ohio, he got all 18 Electoral College votes. And if you remember that, how do they get that number? They take 2 senators per state and the amount of House districts and add those together. So every single state is at least going to have 2 senators and 1 House district. That's why the minimum amount that you can possibly have is 3. Okay, and you'll notice states like North Dakota, states like Delaware, states like Montana, even though places like North Dakota and Montana are huge when it comes to land, there's not that many people. Okay, no offense to Wyoming, it's like 15 people and a goat. It's not a huge populous state, so they are only going to have 3 Electoral College votes. And I don't mean that to be demeaning towards Wyoming. It's just a very low population state. Okay, Alaska is our largest state, and yet we'll only have 3 votes just because of the population. Okay, nothing demeaning against those people out there in those states. It's just a lot of land, not many people. Meanwhile, you have other states that are very small. So, for example, Massachusetts, not a great deal of land mass, but they have 11 Electoral College votes, which means they have 9 congressional districts in a very small state. If you look at Massachusetts, which this is Massachusetts right here, that I'm kind of playing with the color scheme of, Massachusetts, how many Massachusetts could fit in the state of Ohio? Okay, it's just a very dense population state. Okay. Again, it's all based upon House membership, and it's based upon 2 senators per state. But it's a winner-take-all system. The only 2 states that don't do that are Maine and Nebraska. And usually that doesn't matter all that much, but this election cycle saw an aberration. You saw Maine, which is up here, become striped, as did Nebraska out here. So what happened is in Maine, Joe Biden won the state. Okay, so the state Like I said, the percentage vote in the state went to Joe Biden, so he won the 2 Senate positions. And then they break it down by House districts. So in the first district, Joe Biden won. But in the second district, Donald Trump won more votes, so he was able to salvage one electoral college vote out of Maine. The same thing on the opposite side happened in Nebraska. Donald Trump won the entire state, but Joe Biden won the second congressional district, so he got one electoral college vote out of that as well. Now, why does that matter? In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter all that much, but it could, depending upon how the votes tallied. There was a time where we were kind of concerned that maybe, just maybe, this would be a 269 tie, in which case it would go to the House of Representatives. According to the Constitution, that's who resolves any and all either ties or undecided. If nobody gets 270 electoral college votes in the electoral college, it has to go to the House of Representatives, which has happened in American history. The last time that happened was back in the 1800s, so it's been a while. But that was the nightmare scenario on election night. Neither Trump or Biden supporters would have been happy with a tie. Now, to give you an idea of how that would kind of work, if it did go to the House of Representatives, and this kind of plays into what I'm going to talk about here in a bit with the legal maneuverings, if it does go to the House of Representatives, while the Democrats control the overall House right now, they do not control the states, because what ends up happening in that scenario is the House of Representatives comes together and the representatives in the state vote together with one vote. So there's only one vote per state. So there's only 50 votes in that House vote on the presidency. Okay, so every state only gets one vote. Well, if you notice how many red states there are comparative to blue states, and even some of these blue states have more Republican representatives than they do Democrats. So the chances are that if it goes to the House of Representatives, even though it's overwhelmingly, and I don't want to say overwhelmingly, but a majority would be a better term, of Democrats in the House, there's more Republican states. So if this were to go to the House of Representatives, it would benefit Donald Trump. Donald Trump would have that kind of in his back pocket, where a lot of states would be voting for him, theoretically, over Joe Biden. Okay. Now, we'll put that off to the side for a second, but that's kind of where we stood at. Now, on election night, if you remember, a number of these states were kind of going back and forth. Okay. And it's because of how they counted the votes. All right. So every state has their own electoral college, or I'm sorry, their own ballot counting methods. Okay. And basically, the election law in each state determines how they count, how they hold their election. Some states allowed for early voting, like Ohio. Some states have very solid absentee ballot system already set up, like Ohio. Some states were actually mailing out ballots to people. Now, they took that extra step because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So some states actually said, you know what, we're actually going to send ballots to you, so that you would have the ease of just filling it out, not having to go through the paperwork. Because if you order an absentee ballot in the state of Ohio, you have to ask Ohio to send you one. Now, Ohio did not send ballots out to everyone. What they did is they sent everybody a kind of informational flyer on how to order an absentee ballot. But that was Ohio. Some states actually said, here are the actual ballots. We're just going to send you the ballot. You fill it out, and then you send it back. And there's, steps that you have to take to make sure that you are certifying that ballot before sending it back in. It's all part of their system to make sure that the election is run without fraud, which is one of the major issues right now being bandied about in the news and by all these politicians. So, be that as it may, on election night, they started counting the ballots. Now, some states like Ohio actually were already scanning the absentee ballots that had already been mailed in. Okay, so if you remember on election night, Ohio was blue for the early stages of the count. It looked like Joe Biden was doing very well. But then as they started counting the in-person ballots, getting all the precincts to report, it started to skew back over to Donald Trump, and it became red, and it remained red. And again, the polls were off this time again, which was a major point of contention on election night, and ever since, that the pollsters were getting it wrong. In the end, Ohio, which was supposed to be kind of a 50-50 toss-up, ended up being fairly solidly for Donald Trump. That did not happen in other states. Okay, other states waited on the absentee and what are known as provisional ballots. Provisional ballots could cover many things, but the most common is you show up and there's questions about whether or not you're registered, or you changed your address, or there's some problem with your registration, and you put in a vote, but they kind of set it off to the side to check whatever the problem is. And in some of these states, they're actually requiring you to show an ID to vote. And let's say you show up and you're like, man, I don't have my ID on me, I forgot. You could still fill out what is known as a provisional ballot and then prove you are who you are. And there are forms associated with that. Again, it depends on which state you're in. Well, needless to say, states like Pennsylvania said, we're going to wait to count those. What we're going to do first is do the in-person voting. So when they started counting the votes in Pennsylvania on election night, it skewed very heavily red. Now, the reason for that was typically Trump voters, Republicans, were a little bit more comfortable in going in person. Okay. Donald Trump had made a big deal about, you should vote on election day, and, a good solid American should show up and show who they are and, go through the proper process. The Democrats were kind of saying, hey, you know what you should do instead, because of COVID and standing in groups of people in an enclosed environment, what you should do instead is fill out one of those absentee ballots and send them in. Okay. So there was there were some bones of contention on that. Well, what ended up happening with that is they count all the in-person stuff, and it's overwhelmingly for Trump. So Trump was up by roughly 700,000 votes on election night. Then they started counting the votes by mail, and they were trending to be very heavily on Joe Biden's side, especially in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and other urban areas. Okay, so as they started counting those votes, it started to skew back to the point where now Biden is somewhat roughly in the neighborhood of about 20,000 votes ahead of him. Still very, very close by election standards, but it's still somewhat of a comfortable lead. Now, once the Board of Elections were kind of reporting this, what CNN, the AP, ABC News, NBC News, Fox News, all of them, what they were doing is they were saying, all right, so Biden is ahead by X amount of votes, and there's only so many votes remaining, even if all of those votes, so let's say, Biden's ahead by 20,000 votes and there's 18,000 votes out there. That means that even if all 18,000 of those votes were for Donald Trump, he couldn't possibly catch Joe Biden. So what they did is they looked at that and said, all right, there's no chance of him overcoming that lead by that count. So therefore, Joe Biden is projected, and that's the key word, projected to win Pennsylvania. As soon as that happened, the news services on Saturday said Joe Biden is president of the United States, because that pushed him over 270. Okay, because if you remember, Nevada was yet to be called at that point, but Biden had surpassed the vote count at 273. Okay, again, as soon as you hit 270 or above, you are the next president of the United States. But again, the key word is projected. Nothing is certified yet. These are not, votes that have been tallied and certified. Okay. Now, over the weekend as well, Nevada basically said, well, we think Biden has already satisfied enough to project, and so news services have projected. Now, you've also seen some news services have projected that Arizona is also Biden. So some news services, when you tune in, you'll see that it's at 290. Okay. But again, it depends on who's doing the count. Okay. Most news services have kind of put Arizona as like, we're not sure yet. The awkwardness was Fox News projected Arizona to be in Biden's column early in the week, basically on election night. But even CNN, which has been, kind of the favorite target of Trump and some of his allies, CNN actually said too soon to call. So if you tune into CNN, they still haven't called Arizona, but if you tune into Fox News, they have. So you're going to get some varying vote totals in the Electoral College. Be that as it may, Arizona is still very close as well. By last count, I think Arizona is somewhere in the neighborhood of 14,000 votes separating Biden and Trump. I'd have to look. It's been a while since I looked, but it's still very close, very close. Georgia is exceptionally close as well. And this was another situation where it started off red and then it trended back. And, later on in the week, about Thursday or Friday, you started seeing Biden sneak over the 50% margin and, started beating Donald Trump in that state, a traditionally red state. So it traditionally votes for the Republican. It did not this time around, at least as the vote is being counted. North Carolina is in the Trump column right now. He's up by quite a comfortable margin in North Carolina. The problem is North Carolina, according to their voting laws, you can return a ballot as long as it's postmarked by election day. It can be returned and be counted. Again, so long as the mail service stamped it and said, "Yep, we received this by November 3rd." It can be counted, but it can be received as late as November 12th. So this week, if the mail comes by the Board of Elections and say, "Hey, we've got 100 ballots that were in the mail," they have to look at the postmark, and if the postmark says November 3rd, they have to count it. Now, if it's after Election Day, they don't. But this is why North Carolina has yet to do this. Why? They had mailed out ballots, and currently the distance between the two candidates is not bigger than the amount of ballots that are still outstanding. Now, that could mean that they sent it to somebody, and somebody said, I don't feel like voting this year, and just tossed it in the trash. It could also be somebody that said, I was going to vote absentee, but now I'm going to go vote in person instead. So that, again, is just going to be shredded and thrown in the trash. There's a number of reasons why these votes are still not tabulated. We're not sure. Now, of course, somebody could have legitimately put it in the mail and it just wasn't processed. The Postal Service may have set it aside, whatever the case may be. They left that open because of COVID. Okay. So as I've heard a number of people say, it's high irony that the president, who has kind of downplayed COVID a little bit, could possibly be beat because of laws put in place to deal with the pandemic. Okay, it's so the nation is getting not only a good lesson in how the Electoral College and the election laws work in this country, but also a little bit of irony too if Trump indeed ends up losing this election. Now, when I say the word "if," Biden supporters are going to cringe and say, "Why are you saying if? He's the president." And Trump supporters are going to say, "See, we told you." I'm not trying to be political here. What I'm going to tell you is going on is these states are in question, along with Pennsylvania, Michigan, and to a lesser degree, Wisconsin. So when I take those votes away, if I say, hey, these states are the ones that are in question, and for that matter, like, let's look at Nevada as well. So you have all these states that theoretically could be recounted. And in some states, it's an automatic recount. I think Wisconsin is, if it's within 1 percentage point, they recount the whole state again. Other states, you kind of have to ask for it. Sometimes it needs to be court ordered. So when you hear Donald Trump say things like, we're going to do legal, legal challenges to the vote totals, what they mean is the lawyers are going to go in and question whether or not the vote was accurate. That's number one. They're going to question whether or not the ballots were legitimate. They're going to question whether or not the ballots were received on time, and they're going to question the legitimacy of the voter. Okay, so what you're hearing on the internet, and you have to be careful about where you're getting your information, because too many people are getting their information off of social media. And nothing against social media. It's a great way to find out how your family's doing. It's a great way to find out what your friends are up to. But let's be honest, folks, if you're getting your information from people that really don't have training in this type of stuff, you might be getting some propaganda. Okay. Now, my goal is to not give you propaganda. I'm going to give you straight up what's going on to the best of my knowledge. Okay. And you can certainly reach out and ask questions for clarification. Now, what's currently happening is these states that are in tan right now, many of them are getting challenges, like I said, to the vote totals, to the ballots, how they're collected, to the election laws in general, who set the election laws. And does Donald Trump's legal team have any legitimacy to here? They do. They have the right to request a recount. They have the right to request some ballots. Some of these states are actually saying, well, we're going to keep these ballots over here, the provisional ballots over here. We're going to keep the absentee ballots over here, the in-person ballot totals over here, because what happens if they deem that some of these ballots are not legitimate? Okay, because from these court challenges, that could possibly happen. They're going to question exactly, for example, in the state of Ohio, when I send in an absentee ballot, not only do I have to put on the last 4 digits of my social security number or my driver's license ID or some sort of proof that I am who I am when I fill this out, I also have to sign it. I have to date it. I have to, there are hurdles here, and you have to put it in an envelope and then inside another envelope. Okay, so there's a whole process to turning in an absentee ballot to make sure that it's legitimate. Now, when the Board of Elections gets that, they check the signature to make sure it matches a signature that I have put on file. Okay, they're going to check into, is this really the legitimate driver's license number? Or their last four digits of the Social Security number? Theoretically, only things that I would know when I fill out my ballot. Okay, every state has these safety measures because they're trying to make sure that the vote is legitimate. Okay. What Trump's legal team is basically saying is that some of these ballots are probably not legitimate. Okay. Now, do they have any viable, credible sources on this? Now, there's been questions about this, and this is where social media can be dangerous because anybody can post anything and get it started. So far, there has not been overwhelming evidence of voter fraud. Now, have there been questions? Sure, there has been somebody out in Nevada that said, hey, I saw people out in the parking lot illegally filling out ballots and turning illegal ballots in. Now, does that mean widespread voter fraud? If I'm a poll worker and I walked out into the parking lot and I saw three people filling out a ballot, and turning it in, that's not widespread voter fraud. It's voter fraud, don't get me wrong, but it's not widespread. Okay. It's not like there's this big conspiracy or anything like that. Now, of course, in a close election, there's going to be scrutiny on that. And this is what the Trump campaign is doing, is they're kind of opening it up to say, hey, let's make sure that our election is fair. Now, again, Biden supporters are going to say it was fair. Like we followed the laws, we did what we were supposed to do. Trump's legal team is trying to convince a judge that there needs to be extra added scrutiny and possibly an elimination of some votes if they find some legitimacy to it. Now, the Biden supporters are going to criticize and say they don't have legitimate things. They don't have there's no legitimate argument about widespread. It's not like, because to put it down to brass tacks here, if let's say Biden's up by 20,000 in Pennsylvania, if a poll worker says, well, there were a couple of mail-in ballots that were illegally turned in, is that going to overwhelmingly cancel out the 20,000 vote margin? Not really, no. There's been people saying, hey, I saw people burning ballots. Well, the ballots, when they investigated, they found out the ballots in Pennsylvania that were being burned were unused absentee ballots that they didn't want to confuse anybody. So they were burning these ballots to make sure that they were not used. Okay. So again, does Trump's legal team have the right to scrutinize this and ask for a little bit of an investigation? Sure. What happened yesterday is that Bill Barr, who is the Attorney General, actually asked the Justice Department to start looking into voting fraud as well. Now, there's been some pushback. There was a prosecutor within the Justice Department that said, I'm not going to be part of this, and resigned in protest. But there are going to be people in the Justice Department looking into this. At the end of the day, what's probably going to happen? Well, there's precedent here. Precedent, if you remember, is something happens and then we follow it moving forward. Now, the precedent that we're probably all going to look at right now is that back in 2000, before any of you were born, Al Gore and George W. Bush ran against each other for the presidency, and it all came down to Florida. Florida had issues with their counting. They had problems with what were known as hanging chads. They were using paper ballots. It was kind of a mess. When the vote tallies were coming in, they were kind of all over the place, and one vote tally would have Gore winning, one vote tally would have Bush winning, and overwhelmingly, when they recounted, most of them had Bush winning, but it was a razor thin margin. Now, Gore v. Bush is an actual Supreme Court case about whether or not Florida should have yet again another recount, and that happened in early December of 2000. Okay. The Supreme Court basically said, we're ending the vote counts. We're ending the recounts. We've done enough. And basically, Florida then certified their vote total, and George W. Bush became president of the United States. That's what happened in 2000. That's kind of what Trump is trying to do here. Now, why is this probably not going to work? And again, I'm not a legal scholar to the level of the people that are working for Donald Trump and Joe Biden, for that matter. But I would kind of be, if you're a Trump supporter and you're really hoping for this, you need to be careful about this, because Gore was suing on one state back in 2000, and it was razor thin margin. You're talking about suing in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and possibly Wisconsin. Okay? Because here's the deal. Let's say Donald Trump manages to get some votes thrown out because of provisional ballots or absentee ballots or whatever else in Pennsylvania. So let's say he gets it. Pennsylvania goes red. Let's say North Carolina certifies theirs. They go red. Is Donald Trump over 270 at that point? He is not. Let's say Arizona actually swings back when they count all their votes officially and he gets it. He's still not at 270. Okay. Wisconsin and Michigan were fairly comfortable for Biden. So the chance of that swinging is not much. Nevada has already kind of said, hey, we've done the math. We think that we've done it correctly. Then it all comes down to Georgia. Now, again, that's only if Trump can get Pennsylvania, which is currently looking like it's Biden's, and Arizona also currently looking like it's Biden's to swing too. That's the only way he gets above 270. So the best he can do with these legal challenges is hope that North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona all swing in his favor. If just one of them fails in the courts, let's say Georgia doesn't, then Biden becomes president with 275. Okay. And again, we're waiting for certified votes. Now, do they have a time limit on this? Technically speaking, they do. Okay. Because the Electoral College is going to meet in December, on December 20th. Now, when the Electoral College meets, that means the slate of electors in the state meets in the capital city to register their votes. So in Ohio, 18 Republicans will meet in Columbus and register their votes for Donald Trump. There are going to be 55 delegates in Sacramento, California, registering their votes for Joe Biden. This is how the Electoral College does it. And then they report their results to the Senate, to Congress, basically, in Washington, D.C. And then when the Congress meets to start off the new year in January, on January 3rd, they process it and they certify the election. Okay. So is there a time limit? Technically speaking, yes. But if this legal stuff is not settled and the Electoral College cannot meet and the Electoral College cannot, certify their electors, then you're waiting on Electoral College votes that may or may not come. Again, what would happen at that point? If the Electoral College cannot decide a victor, it goes to the House of Representatives. Okay. Now, do realize that Donald Trump can put in a bunch of legal challenges to these votes and they could just be straight up dismissed. This has happened a couple of times already where a judge has heard it. So there's not enough evidence to continue. We're not going to give a stay on this. We're going to keep going with the vote totals. This has happened on a number of occasions, but he's also won a few as well. He had one, a key one last week in Pennsylvania that basically alleges that the vote poll watchers, I should say, which are people from both the Democrats and the Republicans who watch the election returns. They watch it. Basically, they had a challenge and said, hey, they should be closer to the people that are counting the ballots. And they won that. Pennsylvania basically was told they had to allow these poll watchers to get closer instead of standing way the heck back. There were also people that were saying, oh, they're covering up the windows of these election facilities. The reason that they were doing that is because there were people counting ballots, or there were people who were going through voter registration cards and they had all these kind of sensitive information out, and there were people over their shoulder who were filming it or taking pictures. So they felt like that was a violation of the voters' rights to have their information kind of out there. Okay, so needless to say, that was where that came from. You'll see that online. There's going to be all kinds of stuff. I mean, sadly, the internet is going to work against this process right now, where people are just going to kind of be on. And I don't care who you are, there are going to be people out there kind of screaming bloody murder that, oh, there's fraud. No, there isn't. And let's put it this way: in many of your households, Thanksgiving is going to be a little rough this year. Okay. Just throwing it out there. Okay. Be a good year to just kind of avoid it in general. Talk about anything else, not Bengals football maybe, but anything else. Okay. Bottom line is, this is how the Electoral College map works. And this is why the legal challenges are so important right now. Because again, look, let's say we just go on where their vote totals are right now. If we go on where the vote totals are right now, weirdly enough, this is odd. If, let's say, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, along with Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, all the states that were in question, if they trend to Biden, the final vote total, if the numbers, again, stay the same, would be Biden 306, Trump 232, which is odd because that would be the exact opposite of what it was in 2016 when Donald Trump won 306 Electoral College votes to Hillary Clinton's 232. There, basically what would end up happening are states did flip. Okay. Now, the other part that some people may be asking is, What about the popular vote total? The popular vote total doesn't matter here. Okay. Never has when it comes to the presidential election, even though Biden right now, and the votes are still being tabulated, by the way, so we don't have final numbers, but it's looking like Biden's going to be about 4 million ish in front of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has about 71 million, and Biden has roughly 74, 75, depending upon where this all finishes up. Um, Biden winning the popular vote doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because we're talking about the Electoral College being the final arbiter over who becomes president of the United States. So if you hear people talking about popular vote, the Constitution is not written that way. The Electoral College was the system that we put in place. It was certified, or at least bolstered, by the 12th Amendment. This is what we've used to choose our president. Like it or not, it's here, and it's going to be here to stay. Now, let's say everything holds as is. Let's say Biden becomes president, and on January 20th of next year, he is sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. If Biden becomes president, he will come into office with a Senate that is roughly 50-50, because, again, Georgia has an issue. Georgia has, in their election law, you have to get 50% of the vote, okay, to be a senator. Well, they had 2 Senate elections, and both of them failed to have anybody get above 50% of the electorate. So because of that, they are doing a runoff election coming up shortly, where they will then determine again. So Georgia's got to go through this whole process again. Okay. So Georgia's going to vote again here in a few weeks. And when Georgia votes again, they're going to decide who their senators are going to be. Right now, as it stands, it's looking more and more like the Republicans will retain control in the Senate. But those 2 Senate seats from Georgia are going to be very valuable commodities, because if the Democrats do win those 2 seats, which anything's possible. I'm not even going to say venture a guess at this point. Anything is possible because it's 2020. But let's say they get both of those seats. If Biden and Harris are elected, then Harris would be the tie-breaking vote in any Senate decision. And that would mean Mitch McConnell, who's the current majority leader, would not be majority leader in the Senate. So there's a lot riding for both political parties on those 2 elections down in Georgia. Now, let's say they don't get it and the Republicans still retain a slight lead in the Senate. That would mean that the Senate would probably have to work very closely with Joe Biden to get anything done, because you got a Democrat in the White House and the Republicans running the Senate. The Democrats are running the House, but that majority shrunk quite a bit on this past election. So there were some seats that flipped towards the Republicans. So there's a majority, yes, but Nancy Pelosi is not as comfortable with that majority as she once was. And then the big news story before we ever got to the election was the fact that there was a Republican nominee in Amy Coney Barrett, who became the 9th Supreme Court justice. It was the 3rd appointment of Donald Trump of his term here. So he had 3 replacements onto the Supreme Court, which has skewed, depending upon who you ask, and legal scholars disagree on this, but right now, if you're talking about just the visual of it, 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices trend conservative. Okay. At least they were nominated by Republican presidents. So 6 of the 9 justices are theoretically Republican. Now, if you ask any Supreme Court justice, they don't like to be, they don't like their political leanings to be reported as if that's how they're going to rule. Many of them say that has nothing to do with it. If you ask the Chief Justice, John Roberts, he doesn't want the Supreme Court to be political, and he certainly doesn't want the reputation. So again, the idea here is that it is looking like it would trend a little conservative. So what does that mean about the overall government? For those of you that are panicking on either side, it actually kind of looks like they would have to work together to get anything done. This divisiveness in politics wouldn't work when you have such a close vote on both sides. So if you've heard people screaming about, oh, Biden's going to pack the court, the Supreme Court, that would take a change to the Constitution. And there is no way he's getting the votes, even if the Democrats controlled the Senate. There's no way they're getting the votes to get that done. Okay. If there's massive changes to Obamacare, the Republicans are going to get rid of Obamacare. They probably wouldn't have the votes to get rid of it, and they certainly don't have the White House. So if you're talking about any changes within the government, it's going to take a lot of negotiation. Okay. And by the way, that works the same way if Trump gets into office. Yes, he would still have Mitch McConnell, but it would be a very razor thin margin in the Senate as to how many people are Republican and Democrat. It'd be very close. And then, of course, you've got a very close, like I said, in the House. So kind of weigh this out. For those of you that are like, oh my God, it's the worst thing ever, calm down. It's just an election. And again, it's only the national election. Believe it or not, the bigger issue is what's happening in your local elections. Who's on your board of education? Who's your township trustees? Even kind of state, who's in charge of the governor's mansion, who's in charge at the state house and the state senate. They actually control way more of your day-to-day life than the people at the national level. So for those of you that are kind of like flipping out about who the president is, and calm down. It's I know, some of you are very passionate about it, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big. Okay. So again, this is kind of where the shift is happening. And just to make sure we're clear, the states that are still kind of out, and again, this is just projections. Okay. The states that are kind of projected to be still up in the air, if you will, are the 4 states I put in tan. But again, like I said, there are other states that still have legal challenges from the Trump campaign. This is how it's all kind of working out right now. Okay. And there's still, by the way, still problems with Alaska too, but I don't want to get into that. I've already taken up enough of your time. But bottom line is, this is what the political reality is right now. The projections are saying this, depending upon who you listen to. The projections are, somewhat comparable to this, where you're looking at some people saying 290 and other people saying 279 for Biden. But this is where they're getting the Biden is president. Okay. Again, it's still a projection until they certify the results. When are we going to know? It just kind of depends on when either Trump wins some of these lawsuits that they're filing, and they recount, and we kind of see where it stands at that point, or when he exhausts all of his legal options. Okay. Just kind of depends. Jury's out, both literally and figuratively, on this. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'll answer all the questions I possibly can, but I just want to kind of give you an opportunity to get a rundown of what's the situation when it comes to last week's election. This is not normal, by the way. For those of you that are like, man, is it always like this? No, but it's 2020. We have hurricanes every week. We have natural disasters all the time. We have COVID. We have all kinds of fun stuff that's happening around the globe. This kind of is standard procedure. Hopefully, 2021 is just a little bit rosier. Enjoy the holiday season. Hopefully you're all staying healthy and happy. And again, if you have any questions, reach out through office hours or through email. Have a good one, folks.